I'm Noor Naseer for Adtech Unfiltered. Today's guest is someone who's defining what it means to build a modern brand in sports. Lara Krug is the Chief Marketing Officer of the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, the back-to-back Super Bowl champions, and the first person to ever hold that title at the organization. In this episode, we get into how the Chiefs think about media strategy, brand partnerships, and growing a loyal fan base on and off the field. We also dig into how the team balances tradition with global relevance and what marketers can learn from turning cultural moments into brand momentum. Let's get into this episode with Lara now. Well, Lara, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. What a beautiful place to be.
This is a fun place to be, fun place to have this conversation. I want to ask about the Chiefs. Of course, you're the CMO of this iconic organization. How do you balance between thinking about traditional opportunities to connect with this longstanding brand and also bringing in innovation?
So I joined the organization 4 years ago in July. And one of the main reasons I joined, or was so intrigued to join the organization, was because of that exact challenge. The Chiefs are a storied organization, starting with Lamar Hunt, our founder, who really was such a pioneer in his time of actually being one of the original people that helped to create the NFL. And yet that kind of reflection against what has been happening over the last, let's call it 10 years, but certainly over the last 5 to 8 in terms of the success that the team is having and just being such a big part of culture. And so to be able to come in as the first CMO and to help amplify what was already in place, I think is what excited me. And I think there's not a perfect balance. In our core mission statement, we talk a lot about honoring legacy. I think that's what makes us unique. I think that's what ultimately fans connect to, is that we have a history, we have a story, we have a place in people's lives for many years. But I think creating innovation in a way, or working with innovation in a way that makes sense to that legacy, is where we found the sweet spot. So for example, Lamar Hunt's entire vision was about enhancing the fan experience. Like everything he did, from creating this idea to putting the guys' names on the back of their jerseys so you knew who was playing, to cheerleaders being part of the football experience. Those were all things that were really important to him as he was starting the NFL and certainly the Chiefs. And so now, using that from an innovation lens, how do we find new ways to enhance the fan experience that may look really different in the year of 2025? So content obviously being a huge driver of that, but really media relationships that allow for the Chiefs to show up to new fans or more fans in places that they might not have seen us before, I think is where we try to find that connection between innovation with who we are from a legacy perspective.
Lara, did I hear you say you're the first CMO for the Chiefs?
I am, yes.
How were they getting by before that? I know they were getting by.
They were doing just fine before me. I think it's a great example of just what's happening in sport in general. So many of these sports clubs, brands, leagues have been just such a big part of culture for so long, and honestly really have organically grown, which I feel like in this day and age, for a brand to organically grow is not that easy to do, right? Just with the world we live in and social media and everything. But for so long, the brand really existed in its core element and core product, which was the game experience, right? And the focus was, how do we make sure that we're filling a stadium so that people can experience? And that's still the core of our business. That kind of is what I say, like, makes the world go round. It is our flywheel. But now the world has changed, and the brand, as we say, exists 365 days a year to millions of fans all over the world. And so I think that was the shift that our founder and chairman and CEO, Clark Hunt, and our president really kind of pushed over the last 5-6 years to say, we want someone to come in to help kind of bring that to the next wave. So yeah, I'm the first one.
So, of course, fans are at the center of so much of your marketing strategy, but there is brand messaging you want to put out into the world that, of course, is considerate of fans, but also non-fans who could become fans. What is that overarching message that you want every person to know about the Chiefs?
So there's really, from a consumer-facing perspective, to your point, we have had an influx of casual fans, if you want to say, and that have come into our fold certainly over the last couple of years with the success on the field and lots of things that have happened in culture, but also how a fan interacts with a team, and especially the Chiefs, has just changed over time. You know, people no longer are only becoming fans from living in Kansas City, right? I've been lucky this week to walk around, and the amount of moms and dads that have walked up to me and been like, oh, my 7-year-old who lives in California is a Chiefs fan because of Patrick Mahomes. Or, you know, I knew something that you guys did with one of your military non-for-profits that really impacted my family, and that's how I became a fan. So a lot of different ways that they're coming in. What we're finding is that the casual fans are oftentimes a bit more passionate. And so we talk a lot about Chiefs Kingdom. That's how we call our fan base. We talk a lot about them being the loudest in the world. So our stadium is actually the loudest stadium in the world based on a Guinness World Record that was broken many years ago. And so the messaging that we've been starting to really put out is about Chiefs Kingdom kind of being wherever you are, and really the kingdom heard around the world. This idea that wherever you are, if you think about sound as an equation to like passion, if we're loud in the stadium, you can also equate that to how a fan feels. And so if we can find ways for fans to connect with us in a way that shows their passion, using their voice, using their creativity, using content, that's really the message we've been really pushing externally. And then internally, which is really more of an internal kind of dream and mantra, but I think it has really shaped everything we've done over the last few years, is we have this ambition of becoming the world's team, which sounds big and lofty. And we realize we are like years away from doing that. But it has really, really shifted the mindset of our internal organization to say, how do we make sure we're beloved locally? But then how do you take that local love and find a way to amplify it to kind of the global audience and the global fan base that we think is there?
So I'm going to skip ahead to that question about being the world's team. It's a big ambition.
Yeah.
What needs to happen so that you can be the world's team? I'm sure you're building a roadmap about what needs to actually be achieved. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, and I'm sure, obviously, we're both Americans sitting here in France. American football in the US is obviously huge, right? It is by far the largest sport. It is by far, from a share of mind perspective, certainly the largest one from a fan base, media attention. Globally, though, American football is still quite small in comparison to soccer, in comparison to basketball in some countries, even some comparison to some smaller, what we would consider in America, smaller sports. But cricket, rugby, in Germany, handball is a huge sport. So I think the first and foremost is this acceleration of growing the game of football and that awareness of what American football is. I think that's really a key linchpin, and that's why the NFL has been pushing this internationalization, the globalization of the sport. That's why we've been playing games more internationally. That's why there's NFL player programs where we're trying to bring players in from other countries, right? Obviously, that's a huge driver. That's kind of the critical linchpin in doing this. But to that point, I'm a huge believer, and I think that's why the league has shifted as well, a lot of their thinking. Fans are becoming fans of players and of a club, right? And in our case, the Chiefs. There's something about the Chiefs or one of our players that a fan in another country is identifying with. It's probably not because of the core rules of the sport, right? You think about it, right? We're 7 hours ahead here in Cannes versus Kansas City. That means that most games are being played at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, right? And so growing the game is a huge part of it, but we also have to connect with fans in terms of what is it about the sport, and certainly about the Chiefs, that they find interesting. So we talk a lot around passion points of like the culture side of it. So fans at the end of the day are probably coming to the Chiefs for a lot of reasons. One, the championship mentality, right? That's happening on the field. Winning by far clearly helps, right?
Yeah.
Being in the Super Bowl back to back is a huge part of it. But that's also then you think about it more from a media landscape. And we were talking, obviously, before we started, I come from a media background, started my career at a media agency. Being within fans, whether it's TV screens, social media screens, whatever it is now, is a huge driver. Frequency matters. And so I think that's kind of the second big linchpin, is we need to show up more often. And if we're not going to always show up in a timing that makes sense, right, because games may be late at night or whatever it may be, then we need to find other ways to have the game show up or our brand show up more often. So content has become a huge part. I feel like everyone's buzzword about content, right? Like that is what kind of makes our brand unique, our reach and scale in terms of our social platforms and our media platforms. And then also finding ways through non-core football activations to bring the brand to life. So for example, flag football is a huge opportunity. Participation in the sport's a huge driver of the game and the Chiefs. So flag football is also an awesome opportunity to reach a new audience, like young girls who can also play that sport, who may never have watched football, whether that's because the timing didn't work or they just weren't interested in it. But now if we can bring them a new product like flag football and bring girls flag football camps to kids in Germany, to kids in Mexico, that now opens a whole new avenue. So there's a lot of our roadmap that we're building, but growing the game and then having fans connect to what the Chiefs are beyond just the winning on the field, I think is where we really spend a majority of my team's time on the things that we can control.
The plans are expansive.
Yes, it is a long list. We have a very long list with a very small team, so we try to do the most we can.
Wow. I also heard you say, of course, it's not in your control if the team wins or not, but every NFL team's objective is to win, right? And win as often as possible.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing about audiences. There are eventually fans that love to hate a winner.
Yep.
How does that play a role in how you market when you have been a back-to-back championship team?
Yes, it's definitely been a big conversation over probably the last year, just with the amount of success that the team has had. And winning in sports is one of those very interesting things because, I was talking about it the other day, you only see the end result, right? The amount of effort that the players and the coaches and the athletic trainers and the staff and everyone puts in to preparing for that success and pursuing, as we talk a lot about this, pursuing greatness, this constant day over day impact, you only end up seeing the end result. And so there has been this narrative, certainly over the last year, I think perhaps warranted because of the years of success, but I think it was accelerated just because of the world we live in now as it pertains to social media, right? Everything is so real time. And I'm sure, as you're scrolling through your feed, it's almost like an overwhelming amount of things. And so what we try to do is, again, really focus on, I believe, and I think it's at the heart of who the Chiefs are, that we're a small Midwest team that has been put in a position by a lot of hard work to achieve success. That being said, there's a humble spirit in who we are that's where the brand part is really important that we come through. It's not to overshadow or push down the success of the organization, but how we show up. One of our other kind of core mission statements is winning with character. And we have 4, and that's one of them. And I think that really differentiates us from other clubs because how you win, quite frankly, is as important as the winning itself. And I think that is how always kind of been our guiding principle as we navigate this world of winners and not wanting to love the winners anymore.
I work in media-based space, so I've got to ask you some media questions.
Yes,
you have a media
course,
background as well. So embracing innovation with media and advertising in mind. How important are some of these emerging spaces? I know TikTok's not quite emerging anymore, but when looking at opportunities to engage with younger fans or just fans that embrace innovation, how is that showing up for the Chiefs?
So our main outlet for communicating, and if we want to say advertising our brand, is through our social channels. So something that many people, I think, don't realize as it pertains to the league, which I think is a really important context for setting up why channels like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube is a huge driver, Snapchat, huge driver of ours, is within the US, because there are 32 teams, the league is really set up to support each other, right? That's why we're part of the league. But in that model, every club has a designated area, home market area, that they are allowed to actually advertise in, right? So to put paid dollars against. In our case, thankfully, we're in the middle of the country, so you have a little bit more room compared to some of the East Coast teams, which are all kind of stacked on top of each other. But when you have that context, we are allowed to put paid dollars and allow for corporate partners to advertise our brand or leverage our brand within basically Kansas, Missouri, and a little part of another state. Once you understand that, you realize, well, if you're trying to become a national brand and an international brand, using the power of social media, which is obviously borderless in that case, right? Especially organic social, you realize the importance of those channels. That really is our main media. We really think of ourselves as a media and entertainment company now. Our engagement is the number one in the league in terms of our engagement numbers. We're number one on TikTok out of all of the clubs, just behind really the NFL themselves. And so again, where organic reach for most brands is next to impossible, right? And paid advertising and advertising in the more classic ways is where their business sits. Ours is completely different. Organic social is where our main business is. It is the media channel that we have. We treat each channel similar but different, obviously, based on the audience. So TikTok, for example, is most brands is where we can have a bit more fun, right? The brand is a bit more who you would imagine it to be on TikTok. Snapchat is actually one of our youngest channels and where we've been able to really test and learn on what kind of content really helmets off, as we say. So getting to know the guys, but also getting to know people are so interested of like what happens at an NFL office. People are super interested of like, what does the cafeteria look like? And what kind of drinks are people like? There's just this very interested factor in the rest of the business, even outside of kind of the field. And so we use those channels to try to tell stories like that. But then we also use those channels to tell stories about what we're doing in the community and the impact. And again, sports is very unique because it's such a big part of the local community. You can't separate Kansas City from the Chiefs. And that's where you're also finding similarities at a global level, right? So if you go, in Wales, right, like in a different country, the local soccer team or the local rugby team is such a big part of the city. And so that's where we're finding connection with those fans. They may not be fans of the Chiefs originally, but they see what a big part of we are with the local community. And so maybe through social, they're able to connect with us through that mentality or that value, which unlocks other opportunities.
Wow. There's just so much going on, so much learning as far as all these different ways that you're interacting. And also incredible to see that you've had so much success from an engagement perspective by comparison to all the other leagues out there.
Yeah.
So, Lara, you mentioned so many of these different priorities that you have for the Chiefs. I want to bring it back into media goals. So the ones that come to mind for me that seem obvious are ticket sales and getting people, I guess, to watch the games, selling merchandise. But that feels very short-sighted relative to so many other things that you have as priorities. Can you share what some of the other big ones are on your end?
Yeah. So, we talk about it as long-term goals and then obviously the short-term KPIs or metrics that we have to keep a close eye on. As you said, ticket sales, merch sales, especially merch sales as it pertains to our retail stores in the stadium, concessions, ticketing, parking, right? Those are really the core. When you think about it at a little bit of a larger scale, certainly as we look at like brand health and brand reputation, total fan size, which seems kind of big and round, what we've found is that, and that's how the league looks at it too. So we're the second largest fan base of the 32 teams, which is crazy when you think about it. We're actually like the 29th smallest city out of the 32. So when you think about the levels of ratio, but that's a huge driver. We talk a lot around like reputation, which is a really important one, community impact. So whether that's dollars that we have a non-for-profit, the Hunt Family Foundation. So how are the dollars going out? What is that actually impacting people's lives? So there's a lot of different pieces of the brand that we look at. I don't even want to call it short-term in the day-to-day versus then certainly what the long-term growth is. Obviously, EBITDA, right, is a big driver of that. Revenue, all of the financial metrics too. And we've actually just gone through a process to really, as we keep growing and the globalization of the brand becomes more and more important, internally, we're also going through a process of maturing the way that we are looking at the right KPIs moving forward to make sure that we're not losing sight of those long-term goals. International being a great one. The model doesn't look perfect for the first few years. This is a long-term play to growing the brand globally, but we believe in that, and that really comes from our chairman and CEO, Clark Hunt.
I'll ask you a little bit of a personal question. You're not coming from a sports background. You even, I don't know if I should say this, you said you weren't a big sports fan to begin with.
No.
So how was that transitioning from coming from very different verticals or industries and bringing your skills over to the NFL, specifically the Chiefs?
I grew up playing sports and I grew up, watching sports, but it really wasn't a core part. Certainly the NFL, I didn't have a team growing up in the same way that so many people now have a passionate team. I have a 6 and 8 year old and they are very passionate about the Chiefs through and through now, which is so fun to watch them kind of grow up in that way. And I came from large marketing led organizations. I think that has given me the right perspective coming into a solid organization that was looking for growth. I think I've always tended to gravitate towards opportunity, even within large organizations that are somewhat entrepreneur in nature, in the sense of they have an opportunity or a problem to solve, however you want to use that word. There perhaps isn't a perfect roadmap to get there. So that mentality of being autonomous, that mentality of, quite frankly, throwing out the playbook or writing it from scratch, I seem to gravitate towards. And I think I've been able to take a lot of the fundamentals in brand building that I was given and learned at places like Anheuser-Busch and L'Oreal, who are best in the business in terms of growing and building brands, and apply that to the Chiefs. But then taking a bit of that media background and that digital first background and social first background that I have, and applying it in a way that the brand just requires a very non-traditional way of thinking, right? You don't have, again, the traditional methods of just going and buying the impressions through TV, right? Or just even having gigantic budgets to go and buy Super Bowl ads. We don't have that. What we have is a whole other avenue of media content and creative thinking to grow the brand. And that background, I think, of mine was able to bring it and apply it to this industry and this brand of the Chiefs.
Yeah. You got to stay creative, leverage those past learnings, apply them in new ways, so there can be a lot of upside coming from the
Absolutely.
outside as well.
I think that's what you're seeing in sport across the board. And I feel very fortunate to be in the position. I love being a woman in the position, but it's more than just those things. I think it's just really having that innovative spirit to you and realizing that you're in a unique position. Sports are such a big part of the world right now. They've always been, but I feel like, I'm sure you feel it this week, it's kind of everywhere. I think it's the one thing that still is uniting people. It's the one thing where there's still a live audience. It's the one thing that you feel like has endless opportunity in terms of storytelling. So I think that combination of ingredients makes it a really special place to be.
Yeah. Well, I'll land on just a couple more questions.
Of course.
I have to ask this because I work in the ad tech space and I've been in the media space basically my entire career. People want to talk to you. That's an understatement. People who are selling things from the ad tech space and the advertising space want to hit you up. And oftentimes they've been tasked with just selling it in before fully understanding what it is that you could take advantage of.
Yeah.
What types of questions should people be asking you before they're petitioning the potential opportunity to partner?
I think really understanding our business and understanding a bit of even our structure. It's really important to realize that there are a lot of things that I would love. I would love nothing more to do and to partner with, but I'll use the buzzword of AI. There are a million things that I would love to try to learn and test within the AI space, and we are starting to do that. But without understanding that there are NFLPA rules against how we use AI with players, understanding the concept that the NFL actually owns the Chiefs IP, the Chiefs do not, understanding the nuances of how we have to work with the league. And we have to work, for example, with Skydance Sports to tell national stories with the IP. Understanding the nuances and spending that time, I think, is really important, because that will then likely outline like the problems that we then therefore need to solve, and where can technology be a driver of it. Another example, we have many corporate partners, right, we are a property as much as a media company and a brand. So we have corporate partners like Hy-Vee and Coca-Cola and T-Mobile, who, if you think about it and from that lens, my internal team is also a creative agency, right? They oftentimes are coming to us not just to put their logos on signage in the stadium. That's a big part of it. But nowadays, most brands are coming to a club like the Chiefs because of content, because of engagement, because of awareness. And so oftentimes we are partnering with them to create custom content. Therefore, we're the ones creating that custom content. We are not an advertising agency. We are a small internal marketing team. We've grown, and my team, led by Rob Alberino on the content production side, Jordan Giesler on the design side, they're the best in the business. But you're talking about a very different proposition when we are being asked to create essentially branded advertising content for a partner. So understanding that, there are many ways that I would love for more technology help, right? On how are you scaling that? Or how do we think about that differently when we're media planning? I think understanding those nuances and listening to who we are and how we're structured, I think that will then unlock what are the problems, and therefore what is the right way to potentially help us solve it. And I wish more people I realize everyone's got little time and a lot to do, as do I. But I like to pride ourselves as an organization, certainly me, on like meeting with as many people as we can, as long as we feel like they're listening.
There's synergy.
There's synergy, and then figuring out what we can do together and having that kind of willingness to be a bit entrepreneur, innovative on how we work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is also something unique with the Chiefs compared to maybe some other brands in that there's so much visibility as far as what it is that you're activating. So if you want to go out there and search and understand first, then that is going to probably give you a leg up in terms of being an attractive potential partner.
Absolutely.
So 2 final questions. One, the marketing of players versus the team. That's a big opportunity on the Chiefs. Obviously, you mentioned Patrick Mahomes. There are some other players too who also get a little extra spotlight. What does that balance look like? How do you decide how much to prioritize, how to move those marketing dollars in a way that's going to be the most impactful for the team?
Yeah, so we are, again, very fortunate to have marquee players, Patrick, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones. Our Coach Reed, right, is obviously kind of best in the business. When I joined, one of the things that was very clear from day one was we are a team. And so there's always been a really clear focus on making sure that we highlight the entire team in terms of all the different offense, defense, special teams, the way the coaches work. So trying not to just highlight one player, even though, of course, there are a few that are certainly kind of most well known. I think we've tried to find ways where we find an overlap with them. My job is to make sure that the Chiefs organization in general is healthy and growing and has a passionate fan base. We know through all of the research, both proprietary and third party, that the players are a key driver of that fandom. So we've tried to find ways to find overlap with them that makes sense, right? So if Travis Kelce is really interested in fashion, he has his own clothing line. How could we partner and do a Chiefs collab with True Colors? Patrick Mahomes is obviously really passionate in terms of his foundation, 15 The Mahomies. It's a huge pillar of who he is. How do we make sure that then our foundation, our community team works with 15 The Mahomies to drive their literacy program or find opportunities for his camps, right? So finding those overlap where there's synergy is where we find that balance. Of course, they have massive reach, quite frankly, much more than us in some ways. And so everything we do is trying to find that overlap. And I think I'm really proud of the team, the organization. I think we've really grown over the last couple of years. And I hope that the players are seeing what we as a marketing team and what we as an organization can bring to them, which isn't about making them do only what we want. It's trying to find ways that it makes sense for both of our brands.
So I have to ask this question because it's been brought up so many times. So I apologize for asking to begin with. People want me to squeeze in asking about Taylor Swift, but I think I'll ask around Taylor Swift. I think there are phenomenon that occur that are beyond the scope of anything that you have planned for. You don't plan for it. It happens, but you can't ignore it. And you have to think about the way in which the team is going to react from a marketing perspective. Whether it is a surprise NFL billionaire girlfriend or somebody else or some other circumstance, what does the conversation look like when it's outside of your scope and control?
You cannot plan for anything that has just happened over the last many years. And I almost am glad that we never planned in that way for it. But we had always had this mentality of preparing for success. Our president, Mark Donovan, says that. That's kind of his mantra, if you want to say. And I think if the organization had not been very clear on who we were, what has happened over the last couple of years could have gone a very different way. We can't control other media, obviously, right? And it became a media story, as it should have been, because it's just such a great story, right? And I think people just love stories and love great stories. So why wouldn't we want that? Ultimately, we're a sports organization. You know, Travis Kelce is a player. He is a human. He is a brand. He is his own creative person. And so we've tried to find ways that felt authentic to who we were. I think what you see in the stadium, for example, looks very different than what you even might see on some of our social media channels. And I say that specifically to that conversation, right? In the stadium, when all of that craziness was happening, you really would never have known it. We weren't showing her on boards. We were trying to respect her as a fan and as a personal relationship, which it is. And so for those fans and that experience in stadium, to really not only just respect them, but ultimately to respect the fans who are coming for the game, right? And respect season ticket holders who this is a big part of their lives. We didn't want to interrupt that experience. That being said, on social media or in partnership with Hallmark, where they created a love story, that's the perfect way to do it, where it was a nod to obviously everything that was happening was part of the cultural zeitgeist, but it was done in a way that kind of had the wink and the nod and that felt right for that audience and that channel and for that story. And so we've tried to be really thoughtful, again, almost from a media planning perspective. We don't necessarily use the words media planning internally.
Of course, yeah.
But perhaps that's kind of always the context that I've been coming from. And certainly my team has tried to navigate in a very sensitive world where, when you're that close to the sun, it can get hot pretty quickly.
Yeah. Under the microscope is like underselling what it is. And it comes to mind for me is you can't overreact, but you also can't underreact or ignore it. There's the right balance. And I think there's a sophistication with which you're handling things, which feels right on the money from my perspective.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah. And we, Mark has said, and it's right, I think if we all look back in 10, 15 years from now, and it's somewhat overwhelming and humbling to think of when you're at a brand like the Chiefs, you're just, again, such a big part of the cultural zeitgeist and history. I think we would be not doing our jobs if we didn't find a way to take the right advantage of everything happening, what's happening on the fields, just the way that the world has changed in terms of the love of sport and content and the global, all of those ingredients. If we aren't doing this now, we have failed, quite frankly, at our jobs, but doing it in a way that has longevity to it. And that to one of the questions I think you were asking too around without upsetting the core apple cart, right? We have a core fan that was coming to us for a very long time that has been incredibly loyal, that has been a big part of our business, but really our fan base from day one. If we do things that alienate them and ultimately alienate ourselves from ourselves, in 10 years, we'll also have realized that we didn't do our job well.
This has been really revealing.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I think we'll leave it at that.
That's a wrap for today's episode. A big thanks to Lara Krug, CMO of the Kansas City Chiefs, for joining us and offering a behind-the-scenes look at how one of the NFL's most storied franchises thinks like a modern media brand. From leveraging digital platforms to deepening fan engagement to approaching partnerships with intention and clarity, Lara gave us a real sense of what it takes to keep growing a long-loved legacy team in today's fast-moving media landscape. Also, a big thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch you next time for more Adtech Unfiltered.